from maternity leave. Be here for a wee bit of peace and quiet. Okay. With that in mind, could I do ask IT colleagues to start the recording? Okay. Lyndon, if you'd like to call for the sender and apologies.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. If you hear your name, can you confirm your attendance, please? Councillor Reid?
Here.
Councillor McMahon?
Ellen, thanks.
Councillor Cowan?
Here.
Councillor Linton?
Here.
Councillor Barton?
Here, thanks, Lynn.
Councillor Douglas?
Here, Lynn.
Councillor Ingram?
Here, thanks, Lynn.
Councillor Maitland?
Here.
Councillor Mabin?
Here, thanks, Lynn.
Councillor Watts?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
And Councillor Filson. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? Barry? Councillor Douglas?
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Just as I always do when we've got planning papers, I'd make a declaration that I'm a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute and a chartered planner to trade, but there's nothing in the papers that would prevent me from taking part in today's deliberations. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Okay. No others. Okay, we're going to item 2 then. That's the 25-26 review of service balances. And Joe will take us through the paper. Joe McGrath.
Morning, members. This is a report that comes to you each year following the conclusion of the external audit of our annual accounts by colleagues from Audit Scotland. This report's a bit later than normal because it's taken a bit more time to try and identify funds, and I'll explain why that happened in a few moments. But I suppose the headline is at March 2025, paragraph 5 notes that the council had reserves of £117 million, so a fair chunk of money sitting in those reserves. The table that then flows then gives the detail around that. It explains that of that £117 million, around 2.5 sits in repairs and renewals, and quite a lot of that's already committed. There's some uncommitted balance in there. The capital fund sits around 25 million. That's a fund that we credit whenever we sell a capital asset. We know that we've supporting the waste review in that fund, but also that the fund itself forms an intrinsic part of our treasury strategy to support our capital programme, and that's committed not just for today but for years to come as well. The housing revenue account, the £21 million there, that's really aligned to those 3 papers that you receive and approve in November each year, and that is committed again for future years. And that £8 million at March, remember, is the uncommitted balance. That's increased at the last stage performance report, which I'm pleased to note. And so the report today concentrates on that £59.687 million. It expands it, explodes it in the following paragraph, in the following table, and it shows that it's made up of that 4th column utilised in year, and that's, you're seeing just the day-to-day transactions of our, I suppose, our living reserve strategy, where services carry forward, withhold, then draw down money in year to support their spending plans. And it's that £59 million that we're going to concentrate, the report has concentrated on today. So paragraph 7 just notes that at the time of the review, we had that significant overspend, and now have that in health and social care, that £10.694 million. And so a real focus in this year's balances review to try and identify funds to support you as elected members as we get towards the budget setting later on this month. So the process itself was fairly thorough. The table at paragraph 8 just demonstrates both the depth of the review that took place and the collegiate working of the council management team coming together to try and not just identify the problem, but also work to support it too. You can see in that 3rd column, released by services, that every service, with the exception of education, has contributed towards the balances review this year. That bottom line, that other central balances, is where we store a whole number of large-scale balances that we'll touch on shortly. The review in those central balances has looked at a number of those centrally held balances. We had the remnants of funds we received for post-COVID support over the longer term, and the review has released all of those balances. We've also had an examination of our energy costs. You'll see in the budget report that's going to come to you in a few weeks' time that as a group of councils nationally, we have purchased our gas and electricity for all of this year and for most of next year too. So we've got a bit of stability. And on that basis, seeing prices fall, I've taken £800,000 from our energy budget contingency too. I've also looked at the contracts for PPP, and again have taken some resource out of that too. And I've also had a look at the long-term liabilities that have been aligned or passed to the council. And I've looked at both the reasonableness of them and also the likelihood of those crystallising in years to come. And so on that basis, I have released 6.725, beg your pardon, nothing worse when the Director of Finance transposing figures, £5.725 million been released from those balances. It gives us a total of £6.537 million of balances that had a name on them at some point. Certainly within the services, they were plans by those services to utilise them. Unusually this year, I'm asking permission today not to release that £6.537 million to the uncommitted balance, but instead to place it in a temporary hold in a new fund called a new balance called the Health and Social Care Emergencies Financial Support Fund. It will just sit for a few weeks because we've got this amount. We know from the report from the Chief Officer of the IJB that you heard a few weeks ago that 1.445 can be released or likely to be released from the IJB before March as well. So that would add to this 6.5, make about £8 million. And there's some other work we're doing at pace as well to try and close that. It's important that that is closed before we ask you to set budget. So there's a whole raft of work going on, not just in my service, but across the piece to try and close that gap. So what it would do is it would give us £6.5 million. Paragraph 10 is really helpful. It notes that the uncommitted balance is £10.6 million. Probably, members, the highest it's been for a while. And you know, my plan is through your support to try and make that even higher wherever possible in the coming months and years. The report itself comes with an appendix that lists every balance that the council holds, both in services and in central. And Chair, I'm happy to stop there and take any questions, recognising that the report today is an important stepping stone towards year end and towards closing the gap within health and social care. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Can I just ask a wee question in terms of paragraph 15, in terms of risk appetite mitigation? Does this have any implication or risk for future capital borrowing or the capital programme itself?
So, no, there is no direct link from this report to capital spend. What there is, though, is something which I speak to yourself and to other elected members about, which is we have gone fairly deep to try and find the £6.5 million. It means that probably when I come to ask you to consider the budget report for next year, and importantly council tax levels for next year, I may ask you to go a bit further than normal to try and replenish some of the funding that we've taken out. Not all of it will be required, but some of it will be in you know, the whole plan here is to resolve, with colleagues' help and your help too, the overspend within the Health and Social Care Partnership. I've spoken to elected members about my plans for asking you to approve a budget for next year that includes significant additional recurring resource for health and social care. And you're seeing the uncommitted balance sitting at 10.6. I'm trying to stabilise things, but you know, I'm very conscious that risks are very much alive in this, and it won't just be a case of supplying funding. There'll be other actions that will be needed too, both across budgets in the council to recognise the finite resources available, and also to mitigate the risks that are there. But in terms of your direct question, no risks to this report in terms of the capital programme.
Sure. Councillor Mayben.
Thank you, Leader. Morning, Joe. First of all, I'm going to go to page 26, item 11, and it's just for a bit of clarity that I see there's 147,000 been removed from the centrally held balances, leaving the 71,000 remaining under the town and village improvements. So I'm just looking for clarification that have the other projects been completed, and like what was the 218,000 balance. But just to add as well, I've got to express my continued disappointment and frustration at seeing departments that have already been required to make significant cuts, having their remaining uncommitted balances removed from already really strained budgets. We could spend hours, days, weeks examining the reasons behind these decisions, but and whatever impacts they may have on these departments, but the outcome's clear. These services, many of them are now being left with no uncommitted balances. So they've got no financial flexibility if any unexpected situations arise, placing even more pressure on my staff who've already been asked to do so much. Okay, that's all, thanks.
Thanks very much. I absolutely concur with what you're saying, Linda. I think that was made clear at the last council, and you know, and it's worthwhile restating. Absolutely, Joe.
Thank you. So, firstly, just in terms of that central balance number 11, that dates back to 2021-22. So they've been complete, and it's the remnants I'm asking to be released today. In terms of the wider point, and going back to just that table at paragraph 8 in that third column, it's to my colleagues' credit that there was no refusal or conflict in terms of releasing that. Was done in that collegiate spirit, recognising that it left them some uncommitted balance, but in some cases not an awful lot. You're absolutely right. And I would hope that as we go forward, that collegiate approach would extend, if needed, to colleagues in other services too. I'm also very conscious of the comment made frequently by the Chief Governance Officer around the local government benchmarking framework and how this council sits in a, well, you can describe it as being a really favourable position, but the favourable position is the lower end of the quartile, where when it comes to the cost of our support services, then we are probably one of the cheapest in Scotland. So conscious of that, and conscious that there will be a need in the year to come through work that I will do to support those support services, and I don't like calling them support services because they're rarely support services. They do have front-facing things too, but that's very, it's not lost on me, Councillor Mayben, and I recognise the challenges that they face too.
Thanks, Councillor Lutton.
Thanks, Chair, and through you, maybe to the Chief Executive. Paragraph 7, we mentioned the financial recovery on the 28th of January, and I understand from that meeting that Eddie and Joe were going to meet senior management in Ayrshire and Arran. I would just like to have an update on how those discussions went, because quite clearly I feel they have a role to play as well in this £10.69 million closing of the gap as we provide significant care at home to keep people out of Chris House Hospital. Thanks.
Through you, Chair. Yep, so following last council, we met in the afternoon here in terms of, myself, Joe as Chief Finance Officer, Craig as Chief Officer, and Dale Mellor representing social work. We had our equivalents from North Ayrshire and South Ayrshire with us in the senior leadership team of NHS Ayrshire and Arran, both the management and professional leadership of NHS Ayrshire and Arran, including the medical and nurse director. there was absolute agreement and understanding about where we are in terms of financial governance, performance governance, and I've been clear at this stage we cannot balance performance governance and financial governance unless there is an input of resource from somewhere else. We require to do our financial governance, and that's what Joe's doing on a non-recurring basis within this paper. And of course, we want any contribution towards non-recurring we can, but the big issue for us is clearly the recurring issue around how we do this. If we're going to maintain performance, we need to actually have the resource to do that. And there was a willingness from all parties to actually work in a different way that should be beneficial, I suppose, first of all, for the residents of Ayrshire and Arran, and particularly East Ayrshire is our interest, that by investing in community, then actually people get a better service than a higher cost service with people stuck in hospital or other areas. And, the Chief Executive and leadership of NHS Ayrshire and Arran were talking about a willingness to actually change how they spend their money to actually invest in that type of way. I have to say, on a national level, that's been the strategy for many years, but we've never actually seen a shift of resource around that. So the discussions and the ask was to go away and come back with an actual plan of how that would happen. And the next time we meet again, meet here in terms of that same group of people, will be on the afternoon of our budget council. So bringing them back together again and seeing what's the progress that we can make, because first of all, it is better for people that they're being cared for in the right place, but it's also better for the financial stability, not only of the council, but of NHS Ayrshire and Arran too. So that's where we are, around that work.
Thanks, Chair. And just as a supplementary, I agree with everything you say, Eddie. But I think we've been playing by the rules since day one, and we've seen no financial reward for that. I think the system needs to be reversed, where good behaviour is rewarded, and perhaps those that maybe are not so enthusiastic in keeping people in the community shouldn't have the resource that should be coming to East Ayrshire.
Thanks, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Is it on this, Barry? I've got, when you go, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going to just say I absolutely would want to associate myself with the comments that Councillor Linton has made. He's absolutely right. In terms of where we're at in the IJB, we're at month 9, it's nearly £10.7 million of an overspend. So we don't know where we're at in terms of month 12. Of course, this provides £6.537 million. So that still leaves the best part of more than £4 million of a gap. What are our colleagues at NHS Ayrshire and Arran offering up to the table in this regard? And do we have any indication of where we're at month 12? Because there still remains a significant gap to fill. Thanks.
So through you, Chair. So the report, you're quite right, the report you mentioned was based on month or period 9 figures. I've asked for period 10 closed early February, and I've asked for a rerun of the figures as at period 10. I'll do the same at period 11. But period 10 is important because that's the one I'll take and walk you through the budget. So that's important to have the latest figures. So period 10 is being looked at, and I'll ask for figures as we go through the month 2. In terms of an actual allocation from NHS this side of March, that hasn't been possible at this point in time. I think that wider piece of what that Eddie's intimated will be much longer, but has the potential to bear far greater results.
There's also, I think we mentioned before, the clause within the integration scheme that we want to look at, and that clause within the integration scheme talks about if there's an overspend in a particular service area, about how that cost share, is done between the council and the NHS to support that recovery. Being upfront, clearly there's overspends in both the council and in the NHS. So although that clause is there, and that clause is something we absolutely need to explore, what that would be in terms of, a resource coming to support this gap, is not as clear. So that's why, we're not clear about what we come from NHS across to us for that. I would remember that the overspend is in 3 different areas. So the overspend is, and generally what we're talking about here is older people services when we talk about some of these relationships, with NHS and the flow in and out of hospital. but there's a significant 3 million plus, you know, overspend in terms of our learning disability services, and there's also about a £3 million, you know, failure to meet, you know, previous saving targets that are more about corporate review, etc. So although that element, and it is clearly really important, that element that we speak about in terms of, you know, that relationship with community and hospital, the other relationships about how we do the models of what we're doing with folk with learning disabilities and what we're doing in terms of corporate arrangements within the partnership are equally as important to do that. And I would reflect, you know, the investment that the council through housing has actually put into, you know, the community to actually mitigate some of these social care costs. And again, you know, I think our models are right, our resourcing around that and our sustainability of that is the thing that's in question.
Thank you, Leader. Just to come back on that, so we're not clear at this stage whether the NHS will be able to stump up any of this shortfall, and there's £3 million of previous agreed savings that they've failed to materialise. When will we be clear on the NHS's position to allow this council going forward, given we are going to be setting a budget in just a couple of weeks? Thanks.
So in terms of the 25-26 position, you know, like, I think we could reach a stage of having to get into a very formal, you know, like, process, you know, like, around that, and clearly that's what we need to scope out. That would take us way into 26-27, you know, in terms of the non, you know, this non-recurring position. In terms of the current position, that's something that both Joe and I and others have been speaking very clearly about, that we need to be very clear that the budget set by the council to the IJB is a clear legal budget that we are setting there, and we also need to be clear that the budget set by the IJB and sending directions to the council is also a very clear legal budget that we understand there's not anything in it that's totally unachievable, you know. Like, so that's one of the questions that we would ask. As you know, we want to do a review of governance, and that's been agreed in terms of taking that forward. And these are some of the steps that we would want to have to be really, really understanding of what happens in 25-26 about, you know, when budgets were set, you know, like, were the things that said within that achievable? Because if, you know, they're not, then that's got a challenge for us. We're clear that from the council to the IJB, we were clear what we were allocating there. And then, you know, from the IJB budget, was ever that going to be achievable? That's one of the questions that we need to ask.
Mr. Philson too.
Thanks, Chair. Page 28, item 20, Dune Academy contingency, £1.5 million. Surely we're not going into a 33 million refurb without a contingency. I would like to know what's in place instead after taking this £1.5 million away, because I think we're doing a refurb, we're going to have a lot of hidden costs there again, so we need to have a contingency in place somewhere, Joe.
So through you, Chair, let me reassure you that in terms of the proposal that you see in the capital programme for Dune Academy, there is a contingency, a significant contingency built into that project. What this is in this page is the previous iteration of proposals around Dune Academy in that brand new school built through South West Hub, that you as a members have decided that will be a refurb now of the existing school rather than a proposal of a new school. What £1.5 million is the costs that were incurred considering planning, designing the initial brand new school. When we move from having a brand new school or a capital programme that's brand new to something else, we try and align as many costs as we can from one proposal to the other. Where we can't, those proposals that were incurred in that initial proposal that has now fallen become revenue, and so they can't be capital. So there's no risk to the Dune Academy proposal as it now stands. This is an accounting entry, so to speak, that clears a capital project into a revenue project. We're now taking it from revenue and adding it to this. It may be the case that as we go forward, we may need to revisit this balance. I hope we don't, but at this point in time, it can be released without any risk or detriment to the Dune Academy proposal as it is within the capital programme.
Thanks for that clarification, Joe.
I think that's important. Okay. Remember any other questions? Comments? Okay, go to recommendations. Can we agree the recommendations? Okay. Next item is item 3, and that's East Ayrshire Housing Land Audit 2025. And we've got Pamela Clifford and Karen Purvis. Karen is going to present the paper.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to present to Cabinet the Housing Land Audit 2025, which serves as a record of known housing completions within the audit years 23-4 and 24-5 and examines anticipated future housing completions over the next 10 years. The background is set out in paragraphs 3 to 7, which detail that the guidance on how to conduct an audit has changed, so this housing land audit differs in some respects from previous iterations. Paragraphs 8 to 16 set out the findings of the audit. Table 1 sets out the completions per sub-housing market area and ward in the audit years. Completions in 24-25 were higher than the 5-year average, and this trend of increased housing completions is expected to continue and is reflected in the 10-year programming. Of the completions in the last 2 years, 74% were for market sale and 26% were affordable units. National Planning Framework 4 sets out a minimum all 10-year housing land requirement, or MATLR, for each planning authority in Scotland, which for East Ayrshire is 4,050 dwellings. Therefore, over a 10-year period, 4,050 houses should be delivered in East Ayrshire. The audit tells us that we are well on track to meet this number of units that would be required, demonstrating that there is sufficient land allocated and that projections indicate that house building will be delivered on the land allocations in LDP2. Paragraph 14 sets out that the LDP2 spatial strategy directs most residential development to the Kilmarnock and Loudon sub-housing market area, which is a reflection of market demand, past trends and the plan's objective to encourage sustainable growth. It is anticipated that the Cumnock and Doon Valley sub-housing market areas will accommodate a smaller amount of house building during the lifetime of LDP2. The geographic spread of housing sites will be revisited as work progresses on Local Development Plan 3. Strategies and measures to assist with tackling population change in the southern part of East Ayrshire will be fully explored as a key part of the future spatial strategy of the next plan. Paragraphs 17 and 18 discuss engagement with Homes for Scotland, who have agreed the audit and been fully engaged in the process on a detailed site-by-site basis. Going forwards, having in place an undisputed housing land audit is valuable in terms of having a robust evidence base to support dialogue with the development industry on potential unallocated housing sites and on developer contributions. Paragraphs 19 to 22 discuss the publication of the housing land audit and how it will assist with LDP3. It also details how the Council recently held the first in a series of Developers Roundtable events where developers and registered social landlords joined with officers across the Council to discuss a number of sites which haven't yet been taken up. This has resulted in a great deal of interest in a number of sites and shows that East Ayrshire is open for business. Further sessions will be scheduled to help inform housing allocations in LDP3. Paragraph 22 also notes the importance of the housing land audit work in terms of the Learning Estate Management Plan, and officers from development planning and education have worked closely together to ensure that housing projections form part of the methodology that calculates the school roll projections for the next 5 years, feeding into requirements for developer contributions where required. The implications are set out in paragraphs 23 to 26 and the recommendations are at paragraph 2, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Barton-Graham.
Thanks, Leader. I've got a few comments and a couple of questions. I'm quite happy for the questions to remain till the end, if that's okay with you. So basically, commentary in this is, it's a positive report. It's a healthy programme of housing delivery. We've clearly got sufficient land allocated to meet the requirements. We're on track to meet and surpass the minimum housing delivery target. And it's good to see the first 2 LDP2 sites completed at New Farm Lock and Comores. I just want to touch on paragraph 15. Absolutely welcome the healthy numbers of allocated brownfield sites. I've got a question regarding SEPA. Do we have any idea how many of these sites are curtailed by SEPA's regulations, especially when it comes round about the flood regulations? And what are we doing to actively engage with SEPA to resolve these issues? I also want to move on to paragraph 21 as we move towards LDP3. I really welcome the early engagement with developers through the roundtable events. These events, real opportunities to work with developers to try and, in an effort to try and reverse these depopulation trends, especially in the South Authority. But clearly planning, we can't resolve that alone. We need an improved rural transportation system and a targeted economic growth strategy. So my kind of question around a bit about that, is there scope to expand these roundtables so that there's more key stakeholders in the room talking together? And lastly, it's good to see that we're actively seeking funding to find solutions for the upgrade of the Belfield interchange. It's very much needed, both in terms of safety and for an economic growth position. So that's me. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point that you make, Graham. And maybe just to add to that about the Belfield interchange, are we anywhere close to looking at a kind of feasibility study just to show how much improvements to Belfield interchange would unlock in terms of house building, particularly along the 71 and 76 corridors? I think it would be immense if we could do some research there.
Great, thanks, Chair. So in terms of the number of sites at Brownfield that are affected by flooding, so there are 18 sites which of those ones which are Brownfield, which have a developer requirement which is related to flooding. So that doesn't mean that they're undevelopable. It just means that, for instance, they might need a flood risk assessment to go with them. What I would say is, in terms of our housing allocations, we would tend not to allocate a site which we couldn't develop because of flooding. So during the LDP process, if SEPA came back to us while we were engaging with them in that process, and they said that they thought a site was unlikely to be developable, we actually wouldn't allocate that site. So there's a wee bit of that in the figures as well. So you'll not be seeing in there sites that perhaps we might have wanted to allocate that SEPA that we didn't feel were actually effective sites. In terms of the changes to the flood mapping, or in terms of the difference, I suppose, in SEPA's policy as reflected in NPF4, a lot of the areas that we saw where flooding was increased were actually areas where you were getting business and industry or retail, so they're probably less likely to affect the sites that we would maybe have wanted to allocate for housing, although there are some exceptions to that. We know, for instance, about the land around Barbados Road, and there were wee bits of Cheese Bank that came out as well. So a wee bit of distinction there. In terms of working with SEPA, yes, we're starting to work with SEPA on the work that we're doing, particularly in terms of the town centre. And we're also engaging with Scottish Water and trying to look at a strategic drainage partnership. So there's quite a lot of work going on in terms of us engaging with the key agencies to try and unlock some of the land which is at the moment really constrained by flooding. In terms of expanding the scope of the Developers Roundtable event, yeah, I think absolutely. Pamela and I and Blair and Angela would be really happy to expand that and see how else we can add value to those roundtable events. And hopefully we'll have one around about Kilmarnock in the town centre, and also some trying to address depopulation in the south. In terms of Belfield, yes, so we've met with ARA over the last couple of weeks to look at a feasibility study which will explore the technical solution to Belfield, having another look at that and whether there are any alternative technical solutions which might allow us to do things in phases rather than a kind of all or nothing solution. We're also going to look at part of that study at flooding, because there are some flooding constraints around about Belfield interchange as well that affects that land which we'd like to release for economic growth purposes. And yes, as part of that, then we would also be looking at part of the study to look at what is being constrained by us being unable to unlock Belfield interchange. So we're at the moment, we're writing a brief for that. We're expecting a Scotland Excel framework to be ready kind of March, April time. So at the moment, the framework we need is not there, but that should be ready March, April, and then we should be able to get that piece of work underway, which will help us. Essentially, we want to be in a space where we have a full business case to be able to develop Belfield interchange.
Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Leader. Karen, just a couple of points I wanted to raise. I think, first of all, I'll take you to page 33 in the table at paragraph 8. And obviously, I see the number of completions in the Doon Valley for 23-24 and 24-25 at 0 in both occasions. Whilst I agree we've got a healthy land supply, and just to say that you've managed to obviously get Homes for Scotland on board, which is no mean feat in a previous life, I can understand how difficult that can be. So, kudos to the team for that. But obviously concerns around, are there particular reasons why these sites in the Doon Valley haven't come forward? You mentioned, and Councillor Barton certainly mentioned about the SEPA constraints. Obviously, we are aware in the past where we've had sites in New Mills, Brown Street, and obviously in and around Kilmarnock Town Centre, some real concerns from SEPA. And obviously, I know that the Chief Planning Officer in their previous role has had quite a success at being able to deal with some of SEPA's concerns, and I would hope that as she's now with us back at East Ayrshire, that she'll be able to bring that experience to bear in dealing with SEPA, because we can't have great swathes of our towns and villages as urban wastelands because of SEPA. Whilst we need to take into account flooding and the real concerns and the climate change impacts on how we live and how we'll all live going forward, but we need to make sure that we don't end up with barren sites that are a blight on our town and village centres. So more power to your elbow to continue pushing that. The comment you made relative to Scottish Water, I'm quite interested if perhaps you can give members, maybe not just now, but maybe more of an update in terms of the constraints that are in and around East Ayrshire, and any particular locations and what works are required, working with developers and Scottish Water, because obviously the needs for I think Amlaird was our main sewage plant. Is that still fit for purpose? What other, or Braddon, Troon are the two, I think, that impact this side of East Ayrshire. What other infrastructure works are going to be required to take forward our ambitions for East Ayrshire that sees, over 5,000 houses completed in the next 10 years across East Ayrshire, that will go some way, I hope, to stop some of the loss of population that we've suffered. But getting back to my original point, I think just to end in this, I'm concerned at the low numbers in general in the Cumnock and Doon Valley area, but what information can you give us around the lack of completions and anything we could be doing as a council to try and promote development in the Doon Valley? Thank you, Leader.
Thanks. Donald Karen or Pamela, or both?
I'll start. So I suppose in terms of the completions, I think what I would say to start off with is that obviously we only adopted LDP2 in kind of spring 2024, and so there are a whole load of new sites in that, and sometimes it takes a wee bit of time for sites to get going, particularly where we're dealing a lot of times in the south of the area with smaller, more local developers rather than your big kind of national companies. So there's a wee bit of always at the beginning of an LD period taking a wee bit of time for the sites to start to actually come forward. So that said, we know that the demand in the Cumnock and Doon Valley areas is lower, and it is more difficult certainly to attract the bigger developers to those areas, and that's part of the reason that we're starting to look at things like the Developers Roundtable to try and really promote those sites and bring them forwards. When we wrote LDP2, we took a really conscious effort with Homes for Scotland to go through all the sites that we had, and to, rather than carry forward a lot of sites, a lot of plans in different areas will carry forward sites from plan to plan to plan. We really tried to kind of take out the ones that we didn't think were effective. And what I would, I suppose, reassure members is that we will continue to do that. We won't just roll things over if they're not working. We'll start to look at new sites. And I think the kind of closer relationships that we're starting to have in terms of working with the development agents, developer get my words with the development industry will help us to try and really kind of promote sites which are actually going to work and start to unlock them and bring development forwards. But I'll let Pamela come in on the Scottish Water and anything else she wants to say in that regard.
Just going back on the Doon Valley and the southern end of sort of East Ayrshire on that, and the housing roundtable, I think that's really valuable to get house builders sort of views on this site. And you know, we intend to do a number of these, especially as we approach LDP 3, so that we ensure that the sites that we're putting in the LDP can be delivered. We do have a problem of getting the house builders going past Mauchline. So at the Developers Roundtable, we actually asked a range of house builders in terms of some small ones on that, RSLs, and also the big national house builders. Myself and Blair have been meeting a number of them, and they're really keen to sort of engage and look at maybe developing housing differently and having that more sort of partnership approach. Just to say, I suppose the Developers Roundtable has exceeded our expectations. A lot of interest from neighbouring authorities and also nationally about of how we went about that and just the results that are coming from that. Second thing is the Scottish Water. I've been working really closely with Scottish Water. They're really interested in a strategic sort of drainage partnership for Ayrshire. They've got one for Glasgow, Lothians, Dundee is really successful on that. So they do have a problem with the combined sewer round Kilmarnock and East Ayrshire on that. So part of their way is trying to take surface water out of that combined sewer and looking at more natural solutions. They're particularly interested in the work we're doing around Kilmarnock Town Centre. And that also is that they do have funding. So their funding is done every 7 years. So their next wave of funding is 2027. So we have a workshop with them in the next week on that to present what we're doing in terms of Kilmarnock and hopefully to get them to buy in, and happy to keep Cabinet informed of those discussions with Scottish Water.
Good to hear that progress. Just really quite interesting. Just jotting it all down there, Pamela, to remind me to ask you a wee bit more some details later. It'll be quite interesting to see that. Because I mean that's been an issue for some time in terms of the surface water, and despite the £20 million we spent on that line down to Meadowhead right through the town, there still seems to be capacity issues. Okay, any other questions? Sorry, Jim. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose picking up on Councillor Douglas's comments and the concerns about the South Authority and the Kilmarnock and Doon Valley area, that the small scale housing sites, I think, tackling that depopulation thing, about that sustainability and that repopulation, for me, the more positive side of that, looking at that is how we do that. I think some of the constraints, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I know some particular applications that might have been in to build and then the smaller 3 or fewer units that have probably been knocked back because they don't sit on what would have been a prescribed bus service route. However, as we move forward and look at a rural transport strategy, that we need to look at a more on-demand services where we're doing that. I think part of that strategy where they look at buses, if they don't sit on that service route, then I think we need to look at it a completely different way, how we service the areas that sit outside the settlements, and have a fresh look on that as well, because there are areas we know right out through the South Authority that could be potential sites for housing, small 2 and 3 developments, but because they don't particularly sit on bus route, then I think we maybe need to look at that again. Please stand correct me if I'm wrong on that one as far as the bus routes go.
Yeah, I think it's looking at it as a whole on that, and it's about transport, but also about employment, skills and housing. And I know that the Deputy Chief Executive has some ideas and wants to take that forward, that piece of work on that. And I think it's working that across the different services, bringing them all together, especially in terms of the southern end and this sort of resolving the depopulation, or as you say, keeping a sustainable population there.
Thanks for that, Palmer. I think it's a wider council. I think a wee bit, maybe I know the board will already do it, but I think promotion again is in the Cumberland and Doon Valley area is always good to, for anybody that wants to come and build houses in East Ayrshire, that particular area is always stunning. Obviously I represent, Drew might argue that I represent the best ward and the most beautiful ward. Drew would say that's the Doon Valley. But it's always an area I think as a council we can promote more, and I take on board, Palm, what you say about getting developers to come buy Mauchline, but I think the more we promote the South Authority for house building, then it's always going to be beneficial for everybody in East Ayrshire.
Thanks, Jim. Because Worth says home to Rugby Park. Great. Okay, Drew.
Just a wee quick one there. Just there is a bit of there is house building going on in Doon Valley just now. Although it says 0 in the report there, but there's house they're not completed yet right enough at Hay Hill, and a big site for Drungan as well. Again, so and these houses are snapped up pretty quickly. But as Councillor Douglas says, we really do need to promote our areas far better, and the Doon Valley is the best in East Ayrshire. Cheers.
Thanks, Drew. I'll not argue with that. Okay. Colleagues, any other comments or questions? Okay, can we agree the recommendations on page 32? Okay, thanks. Right. Next one is green infrastructure strategy. Karen again.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for the Green Infrastructure Strategy. Green infrastructure encompasses all the natural environmental features of an area and is made up of a range of areas, including, for example, public parks and gardens. The provision of high quality, accessible green infrastructure is fundamental to Local Development Plan 2. Paragraphs 7 to 14 of the report describe the contents of the strategy, which is split into 5 different documents to ease navigation and legibility, being the introduction, planning policy and legislative background to green infrastructure, open space standards and audit methodology, settlement assessment outcomes and priorities, and the cemetery strategy. And you'll see from paragraph 9 that the green infrastructure strategy links to a much wider body of strategies and documents. Paragraph 12 details that section 4 of the strategy sets out which settlements have a surplus of open space and which have a deficit. For each settlement, there is a table which includes green infrastructure related actions which can be taken forwards by the council or partners in order to improve our open spaces, and this will be used in the consideration of planning applications. For each settlement, a table of community aspirations and actions are also identified, and these have been obtained through consultation and by integrating the content of the Community Action Plan objectives. We will be updating these to include any final projects identified in the local place plans, which are expected to be completed by the end of March. Planning officers will utilise the Green Infrastructure Strategy's action plan tables to consider the appropriateness of proposals and whether improvements could be made to the design of development proposals to incorporate community aspirations. The next steps are set out in paragraphs 15 and 16, and subject to the approval of recommendations of this report, the strategy would be adopted as non-statutory planning guidance to support LDP2 and will be published on the Council's website. Work will continue and commence on some of the additional strategies and documents which support the aims and objectives of the Green Infrastructure Strategy. The implications are set out in paragraphs 17 to 23. At paragraph 20, you can see that there would be financial implications from the implementation of the actions set out in the strategy. There is currently no specific budget set aside for delivery of these actions. However, approval of the strategy and inclusion of the actions will support future external funding bids from the Council or community partners by demonstrating strategic support for green infrastructure enhancements. The recommendations are set out at paragraph 2, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Karen. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Leader. Karen, I noticed that within the attachments, when you look at the scoring matrix that's been used for each of the settlements, I just wondered then, given Hurlford in my own ward, and I'm sure my ward colleagues would support this, the score there is negative 23.22 in terms of our surplus in Hurlford for open space, and that seems to be, from what I can see, the highest surplus in East Ayrshire. What would there be any action taken as a priority, or proposed action taken as a priority on those with those lower scores. And obviously I notice when you look at Kilmarnock, for example, has the highest net positive score, where we obviously have significant areas of open space and public parks. So I do accept that potentially, you'd think of a village like Hurlford, which has a lot of countryside around it, but clearly it does have a lack of good quality open space. And I just wondered, given the scoring, if there's anything you can reassure us that as a priority you'll be looking at those with the lowest scores.
Thanks, Councillor Douglas, and to you, Chair. Yeah, we will be working quite closely with Annika and the Leisure Trust to look at what we can do in these different areas and the different actions that there'll be. So we'll start to work through all this with her. It will kind of link into things like the police efficiency strategy as well, and looking at the open space and what's needed and what different types are needed. And obviously, it's not just about the quantity of it, as you say, it's about the quality of it as well. So that work will start to happen with the Leisure Trust going forwards. And we've started to develop quite good close relationships with them and the Vibrant Communities team, and looking at what the communities want and we want to see in there. So I can't give you exactly what those actions will be at the moment, but I can reassure you that yes, we are looking at that and we're working on that, and we're always working, I think, as well through any planning applications that we get to try and ensure that we're driving as much quality as we can through these spaces.
Thanks. I've got, is it on that one, or something else? I've got Graham. Councillor Bart then.
Councillor Reid, just want to raise a wee bugbear of mine. Housing developments with landscaping, open areas and play spaces, they tend to be an afterthought of these developments. And it's definitely a frustration that's brought up many a time at the planning committee, and it's raised by a lot of members in the committee. And green spaces and landscaping should be at the heart of developments, no an afterthought, stuck on the side of developments in areas affected by flooding and poor drainage. And I'm hoping this strategy can address things like that and bring housing developers on board to make sure that green spaces do play a vital part in our communities.
Is there anything you want to comment on that?
I was just going to say, I don't think Pamela or I would disagree one iota with that. It really should be at the heart of good design, and I think really are trying to push the quality of developments. Developers wouldn't always agree with us, but we'll always try and push for the best solution.
Yeah, I think particularly a bugbear of mine, Graham, is some of these attenuation points have just become dumping grounds, just in the periphery of the estates, and there's a bit of danger there as well, just if they're not maintained. Councillor Maben.
Thanks, Leader. It's really just to, along the same lines of what my colleague was saying, but I'm referring to Mauchline, obviously. So I'm assuming, Karen, that the answer is going to be exactly the same, because I find it quite worrying that Mauchline's got quite a high score as well.
Yes, Councillor Maben, yeah, the answer would be the same.
Councillor Filson, too.
Thanks, Chair. Just page 56 here, paragraph 12, towards the bottom, natural planting to improve the quality of open space. We've all seen it for the Millennium Woodlands all put in place, and now after 26 years they're just wild and there's been no maintenance on them. I would just say if we are planting these natural planting areas, there must be a maintenance plan put in place to look after these things. Don't wait 26 years before we start tackling, because it is a big cost to the council to go and try and sort these woodlands out. So just a wee bit of thought and a wee bit of careful thinking there, put a maintenance plan in place.
Yeah, I think what a shake of the heads, I would agree there, Drew. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, can we go back to recommendations on page 54? Can we agree on recommendations? Okay, and revised pre-application fees. I've got Pamela down for this, no Karen, so it must be.
Thank you. This report. I noticed that it's got the wrong date. It should be the 11th of February on that. So this report formed part of a wider report that was presented to the Planning Committee on the 23rd of January. The wider report include looked at our pre-application advice service, but also looked at the elected member awareness sessions, site visits and hearing. But this report specifically looks at a revised scheme for the discretionary charges on that. So the Planning Committee agreed to the recommendations and that the revised scheme for discretionary charges be presented to Cabinet for approval. In terms of planning fees, I know it can be quite confusing. We've got national fees which are set by Scottish Government, which are for planning applications, but this report and these fees are related to discretionary fees, which have been set by separate regulation on that. These fees were revised and introduced in terms of charges for discharge of conditions and non-material variations in April 24, having previously introduced a pre-application charging system back in June 2019. Following review, we found that the charging system was overcomplicated when compared to the charging system used by other planning authorities, as well as the fee structure. Paragraph 5 in the report shows the number of pre-application advice approaches we've had since 2020, from a high of 62 in 2022 to 38 in 24. Last year we had 52. We'd be hoping to increase that, the amount of pre-application discussions, because they're seen as integral to getting a quality development proposal, also result in a quicker decision on that. What we're proposing is that we have a flat rate for major developments, so increasing it to £4,000 for those more complex applications, which really benefit from more detailed discussions and negotiations. And also, given that we are resourcing more the major developments which have more economic, social, environmental benefits to the area, that will offset the increase in resources on that. So rather than just getting a formal written response, we are resourcing it through a number of meetings on that, as well as having the elected member awareness session, which has received good feedback from members, but also from developers as well. The local development, we are retaining the fact that it's half of the planning application fee, up to a maximum of 1,500, so adding £500 onto that fee. A flat rate is retained for single houses. We do get a lot of inquiries about single houses in East Ayrshire on that, so increasing that fee to 500. In terms of the free advice, we are retaining the provision of free advice to householder for domestic proposals, but also to community councils, charities and non-profit organisations, including food banks, hubs and allotments, which bring those community, social and health benefits. Details of the revised pre-application fees scales are included in paragraph 10. Also, we're extending the free advice service to include shop fronts and adverts, with this promoting this town centre first approach, and about our ambitions and aspirations of enhancement of our town centres, and just to also support local business. In terms of other certificates for planning, certificates for licensing, increasing that to 200, and I know we don't get a lot of them given how the fee regulations are set up for high hedges, increasing that to 450. Again, these proposed changes are outlined in the fee matrix, but we have underwent a benchmarking exercise with other local authorities. I always think it's best not to have the highest fees or the lowest fees. You want to be really in the middle for that. So I've also included that benchmarking exercise in Appendix 1. The last ones are the local review body fees, which were introduced nationally by Scottish Government. So no longer is there a free sort of local review that you have to pay a fee. Again, the council don't really have any sort of opportunity to change those, given that they're set nationally by the regulations which were introduced in 2025. So recommendation this morning is to agree the revised scheme of discretionary charges for providing pre-application advice, the licensing certificates and high hedge applications on that as part of the budget to 2026-27.
Thanks, Pamela. Okay, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Pamela. Just a couple of comments I had in terms of advertisements. And whilst I understand the rationale behind having no fee and obviously for shop front proposals as well, again, welcoming local businesses in, I think there have been some advertisements that have had planning consent that within the area that I have to say have raised some eyebrows, I think amongst constituents and probably members as well. So I would urge strongly that we get developers from advertisement companies, round the table, however possible. But what I would say is I do have a slight concern that if we're not charging businesses, and okay, they are small businesses in many cases, maybe less so for the advertisements, they're free, but a single house becomes one of the highest costs across the benchmarking programme that you've issued to us, from £357 for £500. It's quite a steep increase. I'd propose something more in the line of £400 for a single house, noting that there are absolutely some quite difficult and complex negotiations, whether it's one house or more than one house, that have to go into this. So that would be my proposal there. And obviously I'm looking to get the rationale behind advertisements and why you've decided to have no charge, given these are commercial organisations and given some of the concerns I think members have and have been expressed about advertisements that have been given consent. My other question, and I don't imagine you'll have the figures today, is just how many high hedge applications we've had in the last 5 years, if you can maybe circulate that afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Douglas, in terms of the fee, firstly, for the single houses, they do take a lot of resource in terms of single houses. We do get a lot of inquiries for single houses, often in the countryside on that. So a lot of work has to go into it. Again, that fee was largely set as we benchmarked with other local authorities on that. In terms of adverts, there still would be a fee when they're applying for advert consent, but we want them to engage more in terms of getting that pre-application advice. Often adverts are just put up and then we have to go down the enforcement route. So we're trying to encourage that to take that free advice first to get an acceptable advert. And again, it's about helping town centres and local businesses there on that, because often it is difficult for them when they've put up the advert and they've paid the money and planning come along and say it's unacceptable on that. In terms of the high hedge number of applications, I can get you that information, but from memory, I think you're talking a handful of that have been submitted. We get a lot of inquiries on high hedges, but it's the fee which is paid by the objector that puts off people making an application. And also the requirements are quite complicated as well of what is a high hedge.
You just assist at paragraph 18 of the report on page 65. The figures are there. There's been 5 determined from a total of 14 submitted, with the rest either been returned or withdrawn in relation to the high hedges. So it is very low numbers because it's just not an attractive option. If I've got a problem with my neighbour Option 1 is go and talk to the neighbour. Option 2 is legally you can deal with overhanging branches, but that's different if the trees are very high but in the next door neighbour's garden and it's blocking your light, etc., or you're concerned they're coming down. What tends to happen, however, with the high hedges, we're meant to be neutral in that position where somebody comes along with a complaint and we deal with it in a neutral and independent manner as planning authority. But generally folk turn their guns on us and expect the council to go and deal with the problem, and the fight becomes with the problem. It's also a £400 fee, so it's not an attractive option for me to pay, and that's the statutory process and the statutory fee. But it's not an attractive option for MD to come to the council to pay a £400 fee and half under the statutory process to discharge the burden of making the case and establishing all your concerns are grounded in terms of the state and condition of those trees. So it's not a particularly acceptable solution, and those figures reflect that, but it's not in our gift to make it any better than what it is. Just in terms of the fees, I would simply just support what Pamela said. These are, of course, the pre-application fees, and it's up to members. You've heard the rationale. The rationale is a lot of these advertising companies don't talk to us, so rather than make it prohibitive and put another barrier in their way, it's intended to open the door. There's nobody's obliged to have a pre-application discussion, and if they don't come to our door, we do need to deal with it. But as Pamela's identified, a lot of the time you're dealing with these on a retrospective basis under threat of enforcement if the retrospective application isn't approved. And then for the shop fronts, I think it probably sits as, again, with that whole regeneration piece of trying to make it as easy as possible and as red tape free as possible to deal with the shopkeepers who may be trying to do the best they can with their own premises. So the householder one, as again Pamela said, they are often very, very difficult in terms of single houses. They're often the square peg in the round hole, whether it's in the countryside, where it's all, as you know, Councillor Douglas, associated with the demonstrating the need. Is it associated with some agricultural or business need? And there can be a wide range of views on whether or not a house is or isn't supported by somebody's business case. And then the other one is where people, and again, no harm to folk who think they've got a sufficient garden space that they can maybe squeeze another house in there and make a good wee return on that, which if it's big enough and it can be consented, then we're not going to stand in their way. But a lot of people have aspirations to squeeze a second house into a space that isn't big enough for a second house. Hence, as Pamela says, those pre-app discussions and indeed those applications can be difficult and problematic. The fee for £500 was benchmarked, but at the end of the day, there's a reason it comes to Cabinet, which is to make sure that whatever fees we're putting in place meet with Cabinet's approval. And if the view was to reduce it, then that's the view. It's not going to break the bank, it's all additional income, but it was benchmarked against other authorities. So our starting point as officers is it's not considered excessive, but we'll take a steer.
Thanks, David. I was just thinking we could maybe take a 5-minute recess just to get maybe Pamela or Pamela and David to get an idea of what the implications of the reduction to 400 would be. Before we do, I'll let Barry in. Just.
Thank you. I think for me, when it's a 30% jump in the fee, and I hear what you're saying in terms of the benchmarking, this is for the single houses. However, I look at the proposed for East Ayrshire is 500, South Ayrshire is 221, Western Bartonshire 173, North Lanarkshire 264, Glasgow City 120. We've no information from Edinburgh, £357 for Dundee, which was the same as us, and Perth and Kinross 310. Scottish Borders have two different types of fees. So they've got one that's without a meeting, £210 for pre-application. So I take it that's just an email advice or a phone call. And then with a meeting, £552. So in terms of benchmark, I wouldn't say we were within the average of those. This seems a bit higher. And I think my fear is, for the very points that you've raised, and certainly Chief Governance Officer raised there, was we may end up by being one of the most expensive for pre-application advice for single houses, end up with people not coming to the planning authority and putting in applications that are not acceptable to us. Yes, of course, we can refuse these applications. Of course, that'll be up to members if they come to committee. But I think we should be encouraging people where we can. And for the very reasons that we have gone for zero fee for advertisement fees when it comes to pre-app, to try and get them in, given the concerns around the quality of some of the submissions that we've had. And absolutely, I completely understand and support the idea of shop fronts, get them in. But I think when you look at these are commercial developers in both cases, yet we're asking somebody looking to build a single house you know, a significant increase. That's my concern. And whilst I think there absolutely should be an increase, because the professional advice given by the planning authority, in actual fact, probably won't cover the fee in terms of the time spent, I am just concerned that we will end up with such a big hike, 30% nearly hike, that we end up not getting people coming forward. That income will drop, and we're getting developments coming in that are not acceptable. Thanks.
I mean, the point's well made, but we'll just maybe take a wee break of 5 minutes just to reflect on it, and just if we can get just some kind of steer in terms of what the financial implications are. So just maybe take 1:15. Increases. I don't think in terms of the overall savings, I don't think it's particularly significant. So it's good that we can change these recommendations now and again. Before I go to move to recommendations, Drew was wanting about something else.
Just a wee thing I was wanting to ask Pamela there again. I would like to see maybe a wee box at the end there, the page 69, the benchmarking process, just to the upgrade of 3,000 to 4,000, how that compared with all the rest of the councils there, Ken? Is it bringing into line with all the rest of the councils, or was it? I've just been interested to see that. Maybe we could mention that or pass it on to me later on sometime.
Yeah, this is to do with the major applications. Yeah, on that. Why we've put a slight increase on that is because that we're actually putting a lot more resource into it. So we're having more meetings with developers on that, but also we have the elected member awareness session, and that requires some resource to go into that. We've also just also conscious that in terms of other authorities of how what they're charging, like you have Glasgow are charging at 12,000 on that, and that for me is high on that. So it's getting that sort of balance on that. What we're finding are developers do not have an issue to pay a fee provided they're getting a good quality service, and it also helps them to reduce the sort of decision time once the application comes in on that. So it's just getting that sort of balance.
Thanks, Pam. It's just been good to see how we compare there with all the rest of the councils, okay, how it did. I apologise if it's there.
David, if you could put the mic on.
The application costs. The first column there is major or national developments, and if you read across the bottom, there's the 4,000 proposed by us, the 3,456, the 1,300, that's the 12,000 at Glasgow. So the table is there, it's just in a slightly different form. It's on page 70.
Well, that's how I've missed it, David. Ken. It was just much clearer on page 69. That was thank you very much.
Okay, I think it's a bit balanced and just try to get something that's reasonably balanced. But the good thing is, some of these big businesses, I'm quite sure when with some planning applications in Moorfield, like Amazon and Jeff Bezos, I'm quite sure he can afford some of the money that we're talking about. That just for the extent some of these applications come in front of us. Okay, with that, amendment to include the 400 for the single houses. Can we agree on recommendations? Okay, I now move exclusion of press and public, and ask that the IT is stopped.